Lonely rancher fell for the girl. No one would marry for her limp, and told her she was beautiful. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street of Copper Ridge, Wyoming territory, as the worn stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of Miller's General Store. Dust swirled in the air, kicked up by the horses' hooves and the creaking wooden wheels that had traveled countless miles across the unforgiving frontier. Samuel Carter adjusted his hat and stepped out of the store, a bag of supplies slung over his broad shoulder when the commotion caught his attention. "Easy there, ladies," called out the stagecoach driver, a weathered man named Pete, who'd been running this route for 15 years. "Got some passengers for you." The first to emerge was Reverend William Hayes, a tall, thin man in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen both the best and worst of humanity. His black coat was dusty from the journey, and he moved with the careful dignity of someone accustomed to being watched and judged. Behind him came a young woman, and Sam found himself pausing mid-step as she carefully maneuvered down from the coach. Clara Hayes was 24 years old, with auburn hair that caught the dying light like burnished copper. Her green eyes held an intelligence that seemed to take in everything around her, but there was something else there too, a wariness that spoke of years of careful observation. She wore a simple blue dress, modest but well-made, and as she stepped down from the coach, Sam noticed the slight hitch in her gait, the way her left leg seemed to drag just slightly behind her right. "Thank you kindly," Clara said to Pete, her voice carrying a soft southern accent that seemed out of place in the harsh Wyoming territory. She reached up to help her father with their bags, her movements efficient despite the obvious difficulty she had with her left leg. Mrs. Henderson, the town's unofficial welcome committee and most notorious gossip, had already positioned herself near the coach. Sam watched as her eyes immediately fixed on Clara's limp, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to something far less charitable. "Well, I'll be," Mrs. Henderson murmured to her companion, Mrs. Whitmore, not bothering to lower her voice. "Poor thing. What happened to her leg, you suppose?" Clara's shoulders tensed slightly, but she continued helping her father with practiced composure. Sam felt something stir in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't experienced in years. He'd seen that look before, the way people's faces changed when they noticed something different about someone else, and it never sat well with him. "Reverend Hayes?" called out Mayor Thompson, a portly man who'd been waiting by the church steps. "Welcome to Copper Ridge. I'm Mayor Thompson, and this is my wife, Margaret." "Pleased to meet you," Reverend Hayes replied, shaking hands warmly. "This is my daughter, Clara. She'll be helping me with the church duties and teaching Sunday school." Clara stepped forward, extending her hand with quiet dignity. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," she said, her voice steady, despite the curious stares from the growing crowd. Mrs. Thompson's smile was polite but strained as she noticed Clara's limp. "Oh, how nice. I'm sure you'll find our community very accommodating." The pause before accommodating wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Clara, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sam had heard enough. He approached the group, his boots clicking against the wooden boardwalk. "Reverend Hayes," he said, tipping his hat respectfully. "Sam Carter. I own the Circle C Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Welcome to Copper Ridge." "Mr. Carter," the Reverend replied, his handshake firm, "I've heard good things about your operation. This is my daughter, Clara." Sam turned to Clara, and for a moment their eyes met. He saw the defensiveness there, the expectation of judgment or pity, and made a conscious decision to offer neither. Instead, he smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Miss Hayes," he said, taking her hand gently, "it's truly a pleasure to meet you. I hope you'll find our little town welcoming." Clara blinked, clearly surprised by the warmth in his voice and the absence of the downward glance most people gave her leg. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. That's very kind of you to say." "Sam will do just fine," he replied, still holding her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. If you need anything while you're settling in, don't hesitate to ask. Ranch life teaches you to be neighborly. We appreciate that, Reverend Hayes said, but his attention had already shifted to Mayor Thompson, who was beginning to outline the church's needs and the town's expectations. Sam found himself reluctant to leave, watching as Clara listened to her father's conversation while simultaneously observing the townspeople who had gathered to get a look at the newcomers. He could see the way some of them whispered behind their hands, the way their eyes followed her every movement, cataloguing her difference. "Shame about the girl," he heard Mrs. Henderson say to her friend. "Pretty face, but who'd want to marry a cripple? She'll be a burden on her father for the rest of his life." The words hit Sam like a physical blow, not because they were directed at him, but because he could see Clara had heard them too. Her face remained composed, but he caught the slight flinch, the way her hands tightened on her small traveling bag. "Mrs. Henderson," Sam said, his voice carrying clearly across the gathering crowd, "I believe you dropped something." The woman looked around, confused. "I don't think I—" "Your manners," Sam finished, his tone polite, but with an edge of steel. "Might want to pick those up before Sunday service." A few people in the crowd chuckled, and Mrs. Henderson's face reddened. Clara looked up at Sam with surprise, and he caught something that might have been gratitude in her green eyes. "Well, I never," Mrs. Henderson huffed, but she said nothing more about Clara's condition. As the crowd began to disperse and the Reverend concluded his conversation with the mayor, Sam lingered. He watched Clara carefully gather her belongings, noting the way she'd learned to compensate for her physical limitation, with extra grace in her upper body movements. "Miss Hayes," he said, approaching her once more, "I meant what I said about needing anything. The ranch keeps me busy, but I'm in town most Saturdays for supplies. If you need help with anything too heavy or awkward to manage." Clara studied his face, searching for the pity or false charity she'd grown accustomed to recognizing. Instead, she found only genuine concern and respect. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Carter." "Sam," she corrected herself, "I may take you up on that." As the Hayes family was led toward the small house beside the church that would serve as their home, Sam found himself thinking about green eyes and auburn hair, about quiet dignity in the face of casual cruelty, and about the way Clara Hayes had thanked him without the desperate gratitude he'd expected. That night, as he sat on his porch looking out over his land, Sam Carter realized that something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to Saturday's trip to town. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Sam Carter found himself standing in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this particular about his appearance for church. In fact, he couldn't remember the last time he'd attended Sunday service at all. The Circle C Ranch demanded constant attention, and Sam had grown comfortable using that as his excuse to avoid the social obligations of town life. But something had changed since yesterday's encounter with Clara Hayes. He'd spent the night thinking about her quiet strength, the way she'd handled the townspeople's stares and whispers with such composed dignity. There was something about her that had lodged itself in his mind, refusing to be dismissed. The morning air was crisp as Sam saddled his horse, the autumn chill carrying the promise of winter's approach. The ride to town took him through rolling hills dotted with cattle, past the creek that ran along his property's eastern border, and eventually onto the main road that led to Copper Ridge. Other families were making their way to church as well, the Thompsons in their buggy, the Miller family walking together, children running ahead and being called back by their parents. The church was a simple wooden structure with a modest bell tower, painted white but showing signs of wear from the harsh Wyoming weather. Sam tied his horse to the hitching post and made his way toward the entrance, nodding to neighbors and acquaintances as he passed. The buzz of conversation filled the air, punctuated by children's laughter and the occasional bark from a dog that had followed its family to town. "Samuel Carter," called out Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife. What a surprise to see you here. I thought you'd sworn off Sunday service. Morning, Mrs. Patterson, Sam replied with a tip of his hat. Figured it was time to make my peace with the Lord. The truth was more complicated than that, but Sam wasn't about to admit that his sudden interest in spiritual matters had everything to do with a certain auburn-haired preacher's daughter. As he entered the church, Sam noticed the Hayes family near the front. Reverend Hayes stood beside the pulpit, greeting parishioners and familiarizing himself with his new congregation. Clara sat in the front pew, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight despite the obvious discomfort of being the center of attention. Sam made his way to a pew toward the back, close enough to observe but far enough away to avoid drawing attention to himself. He watched as various townspeople approached the Reverend, offering welcomes and introducing themselves. Most were polite to Clara, but Sam could see the way their eyes lingered on her leg, the way some of them spoke to her with the overly loud, slow cadence people often used when they assumed someone with a physical disability might also be mentally impaired. Clara responded to each introduction with grace and intelligence, her answers revealing an education that went beyond what most frontier women received. She spoke knowledgeably about literature when Mrs. Thompson mentioned the town's small library, discussed music when someone asked about the church piano, and showed genuine interest in learning about the community she'd joined. But Sam also noticed the empty space around her. While other families clustered together, sharing news and gossip, Clara remained somewhat isolated. Children stared openly until their parents pulled them away, and young men who might have been potential suitors kept their distance, as if her limp were somehow contagious. The service began with Reverend Hayes's rich baritone voice leading the congregation in a hymn. Clara's voice rose above the others, clear and sweet, her trained soprano adding beauty to the familiar words. Sam found himself listening more to her than to the collective singing, impressed by both her musical ability and her confidence in sharing it. Reverend Hayes's sermon was about acceptance and looking beyond surface appearances to see the true worth of individuals. Sam wondered if the man had crafted his first sermon specifically to address the treatment his daughter had already received, or if this was simply his general philosophy. Either way, the message was clear, and Sam noticed several parishioners shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The Lord tells us that man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, Reverend Hayes said, his voice carrying easily through the small church. How often do we judge others based on what we see, rather than who they truly are? How often do we miss the blessing of knowing someone wonderful because we cannot see past the superficial? After the service, Sam lingered as the congregation filed out, waiting for his chance to speak with Clara. He watched her help her father gather his notes and prayer book, moving efficiently despite her physical limitation. When the crowd had thinned, he approached the front of the church. "Reverend Hayes," he said, "that was a fine sermon. Really made me think." "Thank you, Sam. That's always my hope, to challenge people to examine their hearts and their actions." "Miss Hayes," Sam turned to Clara, "I noticed you have a beautiful singing voice. Have you had training?" Clara looked surprised by the compliment. "Some," she said modestly. "My mother insisted I learn music and literature. She said they were gifts that no one could take away, regardless of other circumstances." There was a weight to her words that spoke of deeper conversations, of a mother preparing her daughter for a world that might not be kind to someone who was different. "She sounds like a wise woman," Sam said gently. "She was," Clara replied, and Sam caught the past tense, understanding that loss was part of what had brought the Hayes family west. "Clara," her father interrupted, "would you mind checking on the music for next Sunday? I want to make sure we have everything we need." As Clara moved toward the piano, Sam noticed the way she navigated the space, her movements careful but not tentative. She'd clearly learned to adapt to her condition, finding ways to accomplish what she needed to do without drawing attention to her difficulty. "She's a remarkable young woman," Reverend Hayes said quietly, following Sam's gaze. "Clara has faced challenges that would break most people, but she's never let them define her worth." "What happened?" Sam asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry, that's not my place to ask." "A riding accident when she was 12, the Reverend replied. "The horse spooked, threw her into a rocky creek bed. The leg healed badly, and the doctor said she'd never walk normally again. But Clara proved them wrong about a lot of things." Sam watched Clara examining the sheet music, her fingers moving over the piano keys to test the instrument's tune. There was something about her concentration, her competence, that drew him in. "She's never let anyone court her," Reverend Hayes continued, his voice carrying a father's worry. "Says she won't be a burden to any man. I keep telling her that the right man won't see her condition as a burden, but she's been hurt before. People can be cruel, especially when they're afraid of what they don't understand." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the church entrance. Sam looked up to see Billy Morrison, the blacksmith's son, talking loudly to a group of young men. "I'm just saying," Billy was saying, his voice carrying across the church, "it's a shame about the preacher's daughter. Pretty face, but what man wants to deal with that leg? She'll be limping around the house, probably can't even bear children properly." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. He started toward the group, his fists clenching, but a gentle hand on his arm stopped him. "Let me handle this," Clara said quietly. She had moved up beside him, her face pale but determined. She walked directly to Billy Morrison, her limp more pronounced as she crossed the uneven wooden floor, but her head held high. The group of young men fell silent as she approached. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet church, "I couldn't help but overhear your medical assessment of my condition. I'm curious about your qualifications. Are you a doctor as well as a blacksmith?" Billy's face reddened. Well, I was just... Because if you're offering medical opinions," Clara continued, her tone remaining polite but firm, "I'd like to point out that my condition affects my leg, not my hearing. I can hear every word you're saying, and I imagine the Lord can too." The young man stammered, clearly unprepared for such a direct confrontation. His friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding the floor very interesting. "I think," Clara said, her voice gentling slightly, "that perhaps we should all focus on the sermon we just heard about looking beyond appearances. Don't you agree?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked back toward the piano, leaving Billy Morrison speechless and the rest of the congregation staring after her with new respect. Sam felt something shift inside his chest, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. This woman wasn't just beautiful, she was strong, intelligent, and brave. She didn't need his protection, but God help him, he wanted to offer it anyway. As the Hayes family prepared to leave the church, Sam approached Clara once more. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice softer than before, "I was wondering if you might like to see the countryside sometime. I could show you around the area, help you get familiar with your new home." Clara looked up at him, searching his face for the pity or false charity she'd grown accustomed to recognizing. Instead, she found something that made her heart skip, genuine interest and respect. That would be nice," she said, surprising herself with her answer. "But I should warn you, I'm not much for long walks or difficult terrain. I was thinking more along the lines of a buggy ride." Sam replied with a smile. "The prettiest views in Wyoming don't require any walking at all." 3 days after their conversation at church, Sam Carter found himself standing on the porch of the small house beside the church, his best buggy polished and his horses groomed to perfection. He'd spent the better part of the morning debating whether to bring flowers, ultimately deciding on a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from the meadow near his creek. They seemed more honest than store-bought roses, more fitting for a woman who appreciated authenticity over pretense. The afternoon sun was warm for late October, casting golden light across the town's dusty streets. Sam had chosen this time of day deliberately. The light would be perfect for showing Clara the vista from Eagle's Ridge, and they'd return before the evening chill set in. Reverend Hayes answered the door, his face creasing into a welcoming smile when he saw Sam. "Right on time," he said, stepping aside to let Sam enter. "Clara's just finishing up her correspondence. She's been writing to her aunt back in Tennessee, telling her about our new home." The small house was simply furnished but comfortable, with Clara's touches already evident in the carefully arranged books on the shelves and the wildflowers in a mason jar on the kitchen table. Sam could hear the scratch of a pen from the back room, and presently Clara appeared, wearing a deep green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," she said, moving carefully but confidently through the small space. "I wanted to finish my letter before we left." "No trouble at all," Sam replied, offering her the wildflowers. "I thought you might like these." Clara's face lit up with genuine pleasure as she accepted the bouquet. "They're beautiful, prairie lupine and Indian paintbrush. I've been trying to learn all the local wildflowers. How did you know I'd like these better than something from the store?" "Lucky guess," Sam said, though the truth was he'd been observing her closely enough to notice her preference for natural beauty over artificial decoration. As they prepared to leave, Reverend Hayes pulled Sam aside. "I appreciate you taking the time to show Clara around," he said quietly. "She's been hesitant to explore on her own, worried about managing unfamiliar terrain." "It's my pleasure, Reverend," Sam replied sincerely. "Your daughter is remarkable company." The buggy ride began with polite conversation as they made their way through town. Sam pointed out various landmarks: the school where Clara would be teaching Sunday school, the general store where she could order supplies, the doctor's office in case of emergencies. But as they moved beyond the town limits and into the open countryside, both of them seemed to relax. "It's so different from Tennessee," Clara observed, watching the vast expanse of prairie grass wave in the wind. "There, everything was green and close. Here, you can see forever." "Does it feel lonely?" Sam asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Clara considered this carefully. "Sometimes, but there's something liberating about all this space too. Back home, everyone knew everyone else's business. Here, it feels like there's room to become whoever you want to be." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the whisper of wind through the grass. Sam found himself stealing glances at Clara, noting the way she observed everything around her with intelligent curiosity, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the way she seemed completely at ease, despite being alone with a man she'd known for less than a week. "Tell me about your ranch," she said as they crested a small hill. "Your father started it?" "He did," Sam replied, his voice carrying both pride and sadness. "Came out here in '68 with nothing but determination and a dream. Built the house with his own hands, survived 2 harsh winters that killed off half the cattle in the territory. He always said the land would take care of you if you took care of it. You miss him." It wasn't a question, and Sam appreciated that she didn't offer empty platitudes about his father being in a better place. "Every day. He died 3 years ago during a late blizzard. Found him in the barn the next morning. Looked like he'd been trying to get to a sick calf. That must have been difficult, managing everything alone." "It was," Sam admitted. "Still is, sometimes. But I've got good men working for me, and the ranch is finally starting to turn a real profit. Your father mentioned you've been helping him with church duties. Do you enjoy the work?" Clara's laugh was soft, but held a note of irony. "I enjoy feeling useful. Back in Tennessee, well-meaning people were always trying to find gentle tasks for me, things that wouldn't strain my poor leg. I was going mad with boredom and frustration." "What would you do if you could do anything?" Sam asked. The question seemed to catch Clara off guard. She was quiet for a long moment, and Sam wondered if he'd overstepped somehow. "I'd teach," she said finally. "Real teaching, not just Sunday school. I'd have a classroom full of children, and I'd show them that learning can be an adventure. I'd teach them about literature and music and history, help them understand that the world is bigger than whatever small town they're growing up in." There was passion in her voice that Sam hadn't heard before, and he found himself drawn to this glimpse of her deeper dreams. "Why couldn't you do that here?" he asked. "Copper Ridge could use a good teacher." Clara's expression darkened slightly. "Because the school board would never hire someone like me. Parents don't want a crippled woman teaching their children. They worry it might be catching, or that I won't be able to maintain discipline, or that I'll be a poor example somehow." The bitterness in her voice was new, and Sam realized he was seeing past the composed facade she usually maintained. This was Clara Hayes angry, and he found her no less beautiful for it. "Their loss," he said simply. She looked at him sharply, as if expecting him to elaborate or offer false encouragement. When he didn't, she seemed to relax again. They had reached Eagle's Ridge, a rocky outcropping that provided a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. Sam helped Clara down from the buggy, noting how she accepted his assistance without embarrassment or excessive gratitude. She simply took what help she needed and moved forward. "Oh my," Clara breathed as she saw the view. The entire valley spread out below them, golden in the afternoon light. Sam's ranch was visible in the distance, a cluster of buildings surrounded by grazing cattle. Beyond that, the mountains rose like purple shadows against the sky. "It's beautiful," she said, and Sam found himself watching her face rather than the landscape. "Yes," he agreed, though he wasn't looking at the view. "It is." They stood in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sam found himself thinking about what it would be like to share this view with Clara regularly, to have someone to talk to about the challenges and joys of ranch life. Clara, meanwhile, was thinking about how different this felt from every other interaction she'd had with a man, how Sam seemed to see her as a whole person, rather than a problem to be solved or a charity case to be pitied. "Sam," she said suddenly, "why did you ask me to come with you today?" The question was direct, and Sam appreciated her honesty. He considered his answer carefully. "Because I enjoy your company," he said finally. "Because you're intelligent and interesting, and you make me think about things differently. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want to share something beautiful with someone else." Clara turned to face him fully, studying his expression. "And my leg, my limp, that doesn't bother you?" "Clara," Sam said, his voice gentle but firm, "I notice that you walk differently than other people. I notice that you're careful on uneven ground. But when I look at you, that's not what I see. What do you see?" "I see a woman who stood up to Billy Morrison in front of half the town. I see someone who moved across the country to help her father start over. I see beautiful green eyes and a smile that makes my day better. I see someone brave enough to ask me direct questions instead of dancing around what she really wants to know." Clara felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. She'd grown so accustomed to defining herself by her limitation that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as simply herself. "I've never," she began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. "Never what?" "Never had someone talk to me the way you do. Most people either ignore my condition entirely, which feels dishonest, or they focus on it so much that it becomes the only thing they see. You acknowledge it without making it the center of everything." Sam stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of the soap she used, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "Clara," he said softly, "you are the most beautiful woman I've ever met. Not despite your limp, and not because of it. You're beautiful because of who you are, your strength, your intelligence, your kindness, your courage. Everything else is just everything else." For a moment, Clara allowed herself to believe it might be true. Standing there on Eagle's Ridge with the vast Wyoming sky above them and this good man looking at her like she was something precious, she felt beautiful. She felt whole. "I should tell you," she said quietly, "that I've never been courted before. I don't know the rules or expectations. I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Sam admitted with a smile. "I've never found anyone I wanted to court before. I guess we'll figure it out together." As they made their way back to the buggy, Clara felt lighter than she had in years. The ride back to town passed quickly, filled with easy conversation about books and music and dreams for the future. When they reached the Hayes house, Sam helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you," Clara said, looking up at him, "for the ride, for the flowers, for everything." "Thank you for coming with me," Sam replied. "Would you like to do it again sometime?" Clara's smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." As Sam drove away, Clara stood on the porch, watching until his buggy disappeared around the corner. For the first time in her life, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow, wondering what new possibilities it might bring. Winter arrived early in Wyoming territory that year, blanketing Copper Ridge in a pristine layer of snow that transformed the harsh landscape into something almost magical. For Clara Hayes, the past 2 months had been a revelation. Sam Carter had become a regular presence in her life, calling on her twice a week with the consistency of clockwork and the enthusiasm of a man genuinely smitten. Their courtship had been unconventional by frontier standards. Where other couples might have sat stiffly in parlors under parental supervision, Sam and Clara had explored the countryside together, their conversations ranging from literature to cattle ranching, to dreams of what their territory might become as more settlers arrived. Sam had introduced her to the practical realities of Western life, how to read weather patterns, which plants were edible, how to manage a horse with confidence despite her physical limitations. Clara had discovered that Sam was not just kind and respectful, but genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He asked her advice about everything from organizing the ranch's bookkeeping to settling disputes between his cowhands. More importantly, he had created a space where she felt free to be herself. Not the careful, composed version she presented to the world, but the passionate, opinionated, sometimes uncertain woman beneath. But as their relationship deepened, so did the town's disapproval. It started with whispered conversations that stopped when Clara entered a room. Then came the pointed comments disguised as concern for Sam's welfare. Mrs. Henderson led the charge, as she did with most of Copper Ridge's social campaigns. "It's just such a shame," she said loudly enough for half the general store to hear, "seeing a good man like Sam Carter throw his life away on damaged goods. He could have any normal woman in the territory, but he's going to saddle himself with a cripple who can't even help with ranch work." Clara, who had been examining fabric for a new dress, felt the familiar sting of such comments. But what hurt more was the way the other women in the store either nodded in agreement or looked away in embarrassment, unable to defend her. The campaign against their courtship intensified when word spread that Sam had been seen looking at engagement rings in the jewelry case at Miller's general store. Suddenly, what had been mere gossip became a crusade to save Sam from what the townspeople saw as a terrible mistake. The confrontation came on a snowy Saturday morning in December. Clara had been helping her father prepare for the Christmas service when Mayor Thompson arrived at their door, flanked by several prominent townsmen, including the banker, the doctor, and the head of the school board. "Reverend Hayes," Mayor Thompson said, removing his hat as he entered the small house, "we need to have a word with you about a delicate matter." Reverend Hayes invited them in, offering coffee that was politely declined. Clara continued working at the kitchen table, organizing sheet music, but she could feel the men's eyes on her. "It's about your daughter," Dr. Mitchell said bluntly. "And Sam Carter." "What about them?" Reverend Hayes asked, his voice carefully neutral. Reverend, we all respect you and appreciate the fine work you've done with our church, Mayor Thompson began, but we're concerned about this attachment that's developed between Clara and Sam. Attachment? Clara looked up from her work, her green eyes flashing. Is that what we're calling courtship now? Now, Clara, Dr. Mitchell said in the patronizing tone she'd grown to despise, we're not trying to hurt your feelings. We're thinking about what's best for everyone involved. How thoughtful, Clara replied, her voice dangerously quiet. Please, enlighten me about what's best for my life. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, Mayor Thompson cleared his throat. Sam Carter is one of our most successful ranchers, he said. He's young, healthy, and prosperous. He could marry any woman in the territory and provide her with a good life. But if he marries you... If he marries me, what? Clara's voice was steady, but her father could see the tension in her shoulders. Clara, Dr. Mitchell said gently, be realistic. Ranch life is demanding. A man needs a wife who can work alongside him, who can bear and raise healthy children, who can handle the physical demands of frontier living. Your condition... My condition, Clara interrupted, affects my leg. Not my mind, not my hands, not my ability to bear children. I'm not an invalid, Dr. Mitchell. But you're not normal, Mayor Thompson said, then immediately looked like he regretted the word choice. What I mean is, Sam deserves a whole woman. The silence that followed was deafening. Reverend Hayes started to speak, but Clara raised her hand to stop him. I see, she said quietly. And what exactly do you gentlemen propose to do about this situation? We want you to end it, the banker said bluntly. For Sam's sake. Tell him you don't want to see him anymore. Let him find someone appropriate. And if I refuse? Clara, Mayor Thompson said, his voice taking on a harder edge, Sam's ranch depends on the goodwill of this community. His cattle need to be driven to our railroad depot. He needs credit from our bank. He needs supplies from our stores. It would be unfortunate if that goodwill were to disappear. The threat was clear, and Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. They were asking her to choose between her own happiness and Sam's livelihood. I think, Reverend Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of his position, that this conversation is over. My daughter's personal affairs are not subject to community approval. With respect, Reverend, the banker replied, your position here depends on community support as well. We'd hate to see that support waver. After the men left, Clara sat in stunned silence. Her father paced the small room, his anger evident in every step. Pompous, small-minded fools, he muttered. How dare they threaten you, threaten us over this? They're not wrong about one thing, Clara said quietly. Sam could have any woman he wanted. Someone who could help him with the ranch, someone who wouldn't be a burden. Clara Hayes, her father said firmly, you are not a burden. You are a blessing. Sam Carter is lucky to have won your affection. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they grew throughout the day. That evening, when Sam arrived for their usual Saturday visit, Clara was quiet and distant. What's wrong? He asked immediately, reading her mood with the intuition that had developed over months of courtship. Clara told him about the visit from the town leaders, about their threats and ultimatums. Sam's face darkened as she spoke, his jaw tightening with anger. They had no right, he said when she finished. No right at all. But they weren't entirely wrong, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam, I've been thinking about this for weeks. What kind of life would we have? You'd be giving up so much to marry me. I'd be gaining everything, Sam replied firmly. Clara, you can't let them do this to us. It's not just them, Clara said, tears threatening. It's the truth. I can't help with cattle. I can't dance at our wedding. I can't even guarantee I'll be able to carry our children to term. My hip was damaged in the accident, and Dr. Mitchell says... Dr. Mitchell doesn't know everything, Sam interrupted. Clara, look at me. She raised her eyes to his. And he saw the pain there, the fear that had been building since the townsman's visit. "I don't want to dance," he said softly. "I don't need help with cattle. I have ranch hands for that. And as for children, we'll face that when we come to it together. Clara, I don't want any woman. I want you." "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Why me, Sam? With all the whole normal women you could choose, why would you want someone damaged?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Do you remember that first Sunday at church?" he asked. "When Billy Morrison was talking about you like you weren't even there?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "You could have ignored him, or let your father handle it, or just accepted that people would always talk. Instead, you walked right up to him and faced him down with more grace and dignity than I've ever seen. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you weren't just beautiful, you were extraordinary. Clara, you have a strength that most people never develop because they never have to. You faced challenges that would break other people, and you've not just survived them, you've used them to become someone remarkable." Sam reached for her hands, holding them gently. "I've lived 32 years without finding anyone I wanted to share my life with," he continued. "Then you walked off that stagecoach, and suddenly I couldn't imagine my life without you. Not because I feel sorry for you, not because I want to rescue you, but because you make me want to be better than I am." Clara felt the tears she'd been holding back begin to fall. "But the town, they'll make things difficult for you." "Let them try," Sam said with quiet determination. "Clara, I've built something good here, something that doesn't depend on the approval of small-minded people. My ranch is successful because I work hard and treat people fairly, not because of Mayor Thompson's goodwill. And if you're wrong, if they do make things difficult," Sam smiled, the expression transforming his face, "then we'll face it together. Clara, I'm not asking you to marry me despite your limp. I'm asking you to marry me because you're the woman I love. All of you, exactly as you are." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was planning to wait until Christmas," he said, "but I think we've both waited long enough." The ring was simple, but beautiful. A single diamond set in a band of gold that caught the lamplight like captured starfire. "Clara Hayes," Sam said, dropping to one knee beside her chair, "will you marry me?" For a moment, Clara allowed herself to imagine saying no, to picture herself sacrificing her happiness for Sam's supposed benefit. But then she looked at his face, at the love and hope and determination there, and realized that rejecting him wouldn't be noble. It would be cowardice. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, Sam Carter, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, Clara felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was choosing to live, to love, to build something beautiful despite what anyone else might think. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, in the small church where they'd first met. Despite the town leader's disapproval, the church was full. Sam's ranch hands had ridden in from miles around, and several families had chosen to support the couple despite social pressure. As Clara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her white dress carefully tailored to accommodate her limp, she saw Sam waiting at the altar. His face was radiant with joy, and in his eyes she saw her future, not as a burden to be carried, but as a partner to be cherished. When Reverend Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss was tender and reverent, and Clara knew that she had found something she'd never dared hope for, a man who saw her not as damaged goods, but as a treasure worth fighting for. Years later, as Clara sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their 3 children play in the yard, she would remember this day as the moment her real life began. Not because Sam had rescued her, but because she had found the courage to rescue herself, to choose love over fear, hope over resignation, and to believe that she deserved happiness exactly as she was. The town of Copper Ridge eventually accepted the marriage, especially after Clara proved herself as a capable ranch wife and devoted mother. But by then, neither Sam nor Clara much cared about the town's approval. They had built something better than acceptance. They had built a love that transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them, proving that true beauty lies not in perfection, but in the courage to love and be loved exactly as we are. What did you think of Sam and Clara's beautiful love story? Did their journey of finding true acceptance and love in the rugged Wyoming territory touch your heart? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your favorite moment from their story, or tell us about a time when someone saw past surface appearances to discover the real you. If you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of courage, love, and standing up against prejudice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories from America's past. Your support helps us bring these powerful human stories to life, and we truly appreciate each and every one of you who joins us on this journey through history's most moving moments.